Doctor? Doctor, come quickly!
The calendar!
Hello and welcome to day 22 of the Genesis of Androzani Advent Calendar for 2022. We're doing the 2-2 for the 2-2 today. And we are doing something that somehow, for the last 5 years, I still haven't done before, which in some ways kind of surprises me. Because this is something that I feel like would be an obvious one to do, but maybe it's more appropriate to do it now, given more exposure to certain things and whatnot, especially for me. It is a top 10 writers list. It's going to be formatted the same way that we did the stuff at the near the start of the calendar with the cliffhangers and the moments and whatnot, you know, the scenes, and you know, like a bunch of other things that we do. We've got Callum here as well. He's probably going to have much of an alternative point of view to me, given he has less exposure to the franchise than I do.
In certain areas, but then there's also another area where there's an entire spin-off I've watched and you haven't.
That's correct. That's very
So
true.
there'll be interesting reasonings, I think, for some of my picks.
Yes, of course. We're including all of New Who, Classic Who, Big Finish, Sarah Jane Adventures, Torchwood, or even K9 and Company, if anyone wanted to conclude that, but I haven't seen that.
Who wrote K9? Okay, let's be honest.
I think
We haven't got the writer for that.
I think it was Bob Baker and Dave Martin, if I had to guess, because I know they created the character.
Ooh, okay. Oh, okay. Because they've written Classic Who. Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh yeah, they've written lots of Classic Who. I'm not sure if they did do K9 and Company. Maybe they did. I can't remember.
Let's see.
I know-
Wikipedia is my friend.
So,
Written by Terence Dudley.
oh, okay. Terence Dudley did a few Fifth Doctor stories, I think, if I remember correctly. He did the King's Demons, Black Orchid, and Fort of Doomsday, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, Fort of Doomsday, Black Orchid, and The King's Demons.
I remembered correctly, yes. I think I was thinking Bob Baker and Dave Martin because they wrote The Invisible Enemy, which introduced K9 to the TV show.
Alright.
Anyway, regardless, we're including all, you know, licensed versions of Doctor Who in this, even books if anyone wanted to include that, but we haven't read many of those. I've read about a third of Damaged Goods, I think. But anyway, so yeah, there's going to be a wide array of media across this franchise to judge writers on. And basically this is just going to be not a definitive list of, you know, the 10 best, because I think to do a definitive list would require consuming every Doctor Who piece of media ever made, and I don't know anyone on Earth that's actually done that. So it's purely going to be based on the things that we have consumed, really. And the bulk of that is probably going to be based on TV material, I imagine, because that tends to be the primary focus of Who. Though having said that, I think Big Finish has propped up many writers as well in certain areas. So yeah, it's one that we've never done before, weirdly. But I feel like it's a good time to. Just felt right. Anything you want to say before we, I guess, jump into it?
Just, I guess for everyone watching, don't expect, because there's so many writers in the entirety of this universe, I imagine for the most part our list will be pretty different, other than a couple of choices maybe at the top, I'd imagine. Maybe. So
Yeah.
I think early ones are going to be very interesting. Like, who just made the cut? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I did like I did with the other two ones we did, like with the top 30 scenes and the top 10 cliffhangers. I chucked about 50 writers into Preference Revealer and just voted. It didn't take as long.
Well, for what my method was, I went on Wikipedia and just looked at every single writer, because there's a whole list of them, and I just sorted from most stories and looked down and saw who wrote a good amount of stories, how good are those stories in total, what else are they involved in, You know, that's the way I did it. I looked up just all the writers and see who do I recognise and who have I actually seen their stories.
Yes, I do have quite a few honourable mentions, but I'll save that for, I guess, after number 2. I've got about 7 of those to do. Because there was a few that got very, very close to making the cut, but didn't quite get there. Some very, very, very talented writers that didn't quite crack the top 10, either because of an inconsistency of stories or a lack of number of stories that I've watched or listened to. Yeah, just a few different reasons, but yeah, some of my favorite writers didn't make the top 10 because there's just so many writers that I love, especially because I've consumed so much Doctor Who that there's so many writers that I've gotten to know and gotten to growing on me to love. I think you should start. What's your number 10?
Alright, I guess I shall. My number 10 is Phil Ford.
Oh yes, Phil Ford.
So, to read off some of the stuff he's done in the main show, he co-written with Russell T Davies, The Waters of Mars, and co-written with Stephen Moffat, Into the Dalek. Those are the only 2 Doctor Who TV show stories he's written. However, he has also written one episode of Torchwood called Something Borrowed, which I haven't seen, but all the stuff I've seen him write within the Whoniverse is all his episodes for the Sarah Jane Adventures, which would be The Eye of Gorgon, The Lost Boy, The Last on Taran, The Day of the Clown, Enemy of the Bane, Prisoner of the Jadoon, The Eternity Trap, Mona Lisa's Revenge, The Vault of Secrets, Sky, and The Curse of Clyde Langer. So, what I love about Phil Ford is, mainly from his Sarah Jane Adventures work, is how good he is with dealing with such quite heavy themes surrounded with young characters. The Curse of Clyde Langer is probably my favourite Sarah Jane Adventures episode, because it's such a, for a kid's show on CBBC, it's quite a heavy episode. Without really spoiling it, obviously with the title being The Curse of Clyde Langer, it's a very Clyde Langer-centric episode, and Clyde Langer is my favourite character from the Sarah Jane Adventures. I absolutely adore Clyde Langer, and I love how Phil Ford writes Clyde in a lot of these episodes. He's very cheeky and very charismatic, but in this episode he really shows this side of him that's been growing since the very start of the show when he was first introduced. And he goes on quite a journey, which culminates really in that episode and showing us how much he cares for this new family he's found. And if you know, obviously, his history in early episodes in that show, it becomes a bit more impactful with how much he's had to deal with. But yeah, I really, really like Phil Ford as a writer, and I think he does such a good job with these concepts, especially concepts coming from the main show to the Sarah Jane Adventures. He handles them really well. Like The Last Sontaran and Enemy of the Bane handle, the idea of the Sontaran just as well as the main show did, which I really, really like. I think he does a really good job with that. And yeah, he's also actually written 4 of the 5 adventure games stories that we played. Well, he wrote obviously City of the Daleks, Blood of the Cybermen, Shadows of the Vashnarada, and he also written the Gunpowder Plot, which we have not played because it's hard to find a source for that. But yeah, so he's actually, in terms of the Whoniverse in modern times, he's written quite a lot of stories, and he's been quite an essential part, especially for me, as someone who loves the Sarah Jane Adventures especially. He's written a lot of really good stuff and been quite involved in a lot of characters that I know very well. And obviously, if you've co-written with Russell with The Waters of Mars, that's already that's pretty great. That's a pretty good co-written credit, I would say. And obviously, Into the Dalek isn't terrible, so yeah.
I'd probably call
it. I think Phil Ford as a writer.
I think a lot of my grievances with Into the Dalek they're grievances I have with Moffat's Dalek stories in general that I think is down to the showrunner, not Phil Ford. Yeah, because it's symptoms you see in
that is the last Doctor Who story he wrote in terms of all the shows. That's unfortunately the last one he wrote. which is a big shame because I feel like there's a lot of him that is just so very talented in terms of dealing with heavy things with characters. He's very good at that.
There's actually one thing you haven't mentioned. He wrote the animated series Dreamland.
He did. He also wrote Dreamland.
Yeah, and he's one of the rare people that had the privilege of writing for all 3 shows during when Doctor Who, Torchwood, and Sarah Jane Adventures were all on air, and he wrote an episode for each one.
Yeah, he did. I think Phil Ford is quite an important writer to the show, really, in its modern setting. I think Phil Ford has done quite an excellent job, and it's a shame he hasn't written anything. In terms of Wikipedia, he hasn't written anything since 2014, which was Wizards vs. Aliens, which I think is a Russell T Davies show as well, which was on CBBC, which was last made in 2014.
Yeah, would you welcome him back if Russell T Davies wanted him back as a guest writer?
Absolutely. I absolutely would like him back as a writer, because he seemingly is really good at writing with. Obviously, with something like Waters of Mars, if you're working with him and Russell, I'd absolutely want something like that back. He seems like he's very reliable. I'd say he's a very reliable writer.
Absolutely, he seems like he definitely has his eye on the ball. If you get what I mean, all of his storytelling is very focused. If you get what I mean,
there's no real episode, I would say, of all the universe stuff he's done where I think that's a massive slip, where there's something that I would say that doesn't work at all, and that's a bit strange.
Yeah,
I think all his episodes, there are some with more flaws than others, but there's a consistency to him. There's a minimum bar, I would say, and he has really good peaks, especially with what would be his last story for Sarah Jane Adventures, The Curse of Clyde Lang again. I absolutely adore that story.
Yeah. And The Waters of Mars is the peak of New Who, so he's got to get points for that, right?
Yeah, he's got to get points for that, absolutely. So yeah, I think, I would absolutely love Phil Ford to come back if he was asked, I hope, because I think there's a lot of stuff. He's got really good ideas too, because all the adventure games, stories that obviously we played, if you extend them and have more development as the characters in there, because in those games you can't really. With those, I think those could be turned into really good one-part episodes. You know, especially Shadows of the Vashnarada. You know, I think that's actually quite a underwater-based under siege story for Vashnarada is really, really cool. A really nice concept. So if that was turned into an actual episode, I'd be up for that. So yeah, I would like Phil Ford to come back. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, he gets points purely for that meme where Matt Smith says, "Get some warmth into you" from Blood of the Cybermen.
Yeah, get some warmth into you.
Yeah, that's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, unfortunately, he hasn't written anything in terms of like broadcast since 2014. So I don't know if he's like semi-retired or something.
Yeah,
which would be a shame. But yeah, I would like for him to come back. If
Russell T Davies wants to expand the franchise again with Disney Plus, I think Phil Ford's a name you could throw in the hat for that stuff.
I agree. Yeah, definitely. He's also other stuff he's written. He's written like 2 episodes of Waterloo Road, which I think is one of those. It's like EastEnders, you know, in Coronation Street, but I think for a younger audience, I believe. And he also written stuff like a couple episodes of Coronation Street. The Bill. He's quite a versatile writer in terms of British culture, really.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Phil Ford is my number 10 writer. I really, really like his work. I think he has very reliable. Like I said, he's one of those writers you always want on your team of a writing team, I guess.
Okay, good stuff. Right, my number 10. We're going way back. We're going way back to the origin. We have John Lucarotti, who is a British-Canadian writer who only wrote for the TV show because this was back in early Classic Who. He was most notably known for his pure historicals in the William Hartnell era, because of his extensive knowledge and down to detail historical accuracy, and just his incredibly fleshed out world building and characters and dialogue and all of the above. He did Marco Polo, the Aztecs, the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve with help from Donald Tosh, and he came up with the concept for a story that you most recently watched for the first time. He came up with the concept for the Ark in Space, and then Robert Holmes adapted it. Every single one of those stories is an absolute banger. Marco Polo has some of the best world building, some of the best adventuring, one of the most epic journeys across Asia, and it has so much vibrance, texture, character. I mean, if you look at all the photography that's done, the color photography that's done on that shoot, it has so much rich everything. It's this long 7-part serial, but every episode has a different location with a different, plot development. You've got so much going on across Cathay, and the stakes feel so real because of the limits of the characters. You've got a whole plot around, drought and not having enough water to feed all the people, and they've had to take on 4 extras given the Doctor and his TARDIS team have joined. It's just a beautiful historical story across Marco Polo traveling to the mighty Kublai Khan in Peking. It's just such a satisfying watch. Then you got the Aztecs, which establishes how time travel works in the show. So he had a monumental hand in establishing a very important part of the canon, and how he uses characterization alongside with that to tie into that time travel element, and mixing that in with a really, really interesting, blood sacrifice culture of the Aztecs. Then you got the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, one of the darkest moments in French history, which ties perfectly into the Doctor and Stephen's butting heads relationship, which ends in a cataclysm of drama. It's a brutal story, and of course the Ark in Space is his sci-fi idea, which Robert Holmes took and turned into a beautiful story. It's such a defining, this is what humans do after Earth kind of story that you've seen redone many times by other writers. And obviously there was one in the Hutt called The Ark, which is also another human future story, but the Ark in Space, I think, is the real definitive, this is how you do this kind of story. It's like that and Gridlock for me are the two defining of that style. And yeah, John Lucarotti just has such great characterization, great world building, great dialogue, great pacing. Everything about his writing is just craftsmanship at its best. And he inspires such vivid imagery with the settings and the costumes. And I think just everything John Lucarotti touched turned to gold, really. So I think he has a rightful place on this list for me at number 10. Of course, I believe the only one of those you've seen is the Ark in Space, right?
Yes.
Which you saw very recently, maybe yesterday, something like that.
Ark in Space is very, very, very good. Very well paced.
Yep.
And the dialogue is incredibly good. Really good.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, John Lucarotti wrote a draft concept for it, and it was a great idea, really, when you think about the Wirren as an alien monster, and then also the whole thing of having a human ship that freezes people for many years until they come out, but then a virus messes up that idea that's supposed to be 100% protective, and it fucks with it. Of course, Robert Holmes adapted that story the same way that Donald Tosh did the Massacre, especially the last episode. But really, John Lucarotti's work, if you want to see it in its purest form, Marco Polo and the Aztecs are where to go. Obviously, Marco Polo is missing. I think the reconstruction is great, but if you require moving imagery, then the Aztecs is the place to go. That is the one that I would point to for anyone who wants to see what John Lucarotti's really made of, because he did a great job of establishing how time travel works in this show. And all four of those stories are so different from each other and so unique and distinct. You know, there was no repetition. There was always creativity with John Licarotti. So, yeah, I think he's one of the all-time greats. Hopefully, someday Marco Polo and the Massacre get animated or found. That would be fantastic, because they both need to be seen for the greatness that they are. What's your number 9?
My number 9 is Eirich Sayward.
Oh yes, Eirich Sayward.
Yeah, Eirich Sayward has written 4 stories, all for Classic Who. He wrote The Visitation, Earthshock, Resurrection of the Daleks, and Revelation of the Dalek.
He also did Attack of the Cybermen, but it was credited to his wife for legal reasons.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I've seen the first 3 stories on that list, and I think all of them are really, really good. And I think Earthshock being pretty masterful in writing it bumps him up quite a few points. I really like The Visitation. I think it's a really, really cool setting, and I think how it's paced, and I think the Fifth Doctor in it is very good. I think he knows how to write the Fifth Doctor pretty darn well in his 3 installments of him. I think really impressed by him in how he writes Peter Davison a lot. And, you know, I think Resurrection of the Dalek is a really, really good way of having Tegan actually leave, and I think he writes it in a really good way where it makes complete sense when that's her boiling point, almost, really. Because that's quite a stressful story a lot of the time. The Resurrection of the Daleks. Yeah, I'm really impressed by that. But obviously with Earthshock being the end of Adric, you know, you can't speak more highly of that episode. I think it's such an incredible setup and payoff with that moment. And it really changes the Fifth Doctor going forward, which I absolutely adore. So yeah, I'm really impressed by his work, and I'm interested to see what Revelation has for me when I eventually get to it. And I would hope
it's
up to a decent standard, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, Revelation is my favourite Sixth Doctor TV story. I can tell you that.
Oh, that's a good sign.
I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah.
Love Revelation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinarily grim and dark, as you'd expect from Eirich Sayward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In terms of Eirich, I think, is a very, very talented writer who has really nice concepts, but he also has a lot of character-driven ideas for a lot of the companions and the Fifth Doctor especially. So
yes,
I think
he also
that's something that I think
I think also what I like about Sayward, what I like about Sayward is that in a world of, you know, artists and, you know, brainstormers, Eirich Sayward's a very mechanical writer, but he's able to implement stakes really well because of that. He's on a lot of the special features documentaries, especially for the 80s, because he was the script editor from partway through season 19 up until season 23, so he was a script editor for a lot of the early to mid 80s during Peter Davison and Colin Baker's runs. And on a lot of the special features documentaries he appears on, the way he breaks down his writing is very based in cause and effect. You know, that's his you know, his game, really. That's where everything ties together, is in cause and effect, is the idea that he goes for. And that means that when he does a lot of his dark storytelling that involves a lot of deaths and a lot of tragedy and the grim side of things, because he uses that framework, it really allows the stories to, you know, have a sort of an impact that you can define within the text. That is obviously, you know, the audience is always going to respond differently depending on who they are, but there is a baked in, this is how we get to A to B to C to D to E to F to try and create this drama. And I think he does a really solid job at that. There's only a few things he did as script editor that do raise a few eyebrows. I think sometimes when it comes to the obligatory script editor roles as doing certain major character things, like how they handled Adric's departure in Time Flight and how that was swiftly moved on from was strange. And then also, even though he didn't write the story, he was the script editor when they did the Twin Dilemma. So there's a lot of, and also there's the big controversy around the trial of a Time Lord. So when Bob Holmes passed away, Eric Saward took his ball and went home, and J&T had to get Pip and Jane Baker to write the final episode, within a few days. So there's a lot of bad blood associated with Eric Saward, but I also think he also did a lot of great work on the show as well. And he certainly can demonstrate that with his writing, especially in the ones that he wrote solely on his own name. Yeah. He's quite controversial, though. I will say that he's quite a divisive writer in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I really enjoyed though his work with the Fifth Doctor, especially. I think he does a really good job with his character. In those settings.
Well, I think he fits the Fifth Doctor really well because he's putting such an affable character in perilous situations, and that makes for a good contrast.
It does.
Yes. All right, then. My number 9 is Douglas Adams. So, Douglas Adams is quite possibly the wittiest and funniest dialogue writer the show's ever had. He's right up there. He's certainly one of them. He's most known for his work doing The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a very popular cult favorite series among fans of that radio series, and then it was adapted into all sorts of different mediums. But in terms of his work on Doctor Who, because he is a Doctor Who fan, he was a Doctor Who fan as well. He wrote The Pirate Planet, City of Death, and Sharda. And he was also the script editor during season 17, and he wrote basically 99% of Destiny of the Daleks because Terry Nation didn't want to do it. Even though it's credited to Terry Nation, he basically had to, within a very short space of time, write that entire script. But what I think, the reason why I just love Douglas Adams so much and his stories is, firstly, he has these wild, crazy ideas. So, like, with the Pirate Planet, you've got like a big pirate ship that is big enough to swallow an entire planet within itself and then plunder all its resources, as a way of, like, stealing everything, but it's planet-sized robbery, which is a brilliant idea. And then you've also got something like City of Death, how you've got Scalione, played by with the Zaroff alien, taking different forms of Mona Lisa out of different points in history and owning all these copies of the same painting, to try and put that as part of his plan. It's just an absolutely batshit idea. The same thing with Sharda. That's a story that was going to air but didn't end up airing because they didn't end up filming all the scenes, but they ended up animating the rest of it later. Is that has a really interesting Time Lord plot and a prison in the middle of space, sort of a Time Lord prison in space, and it's such an interesting idea, and it deals with things like entropy and whatnot. But I think the real golden ticket with Douglas Adams is that his comedic dialogue and Tom Baker as an actor just go together. Like, they have the perfect match because they have exactly the same kind of wit, and it's so clever, it's so witty, it's so funny, and he's just able to write non-stop, back to back iconic comedic moments that are just so memorable, so quotable. Just some of the most entertaining, funny dialogue in the entire show, and on just that entertainment value alone, he deserves a place as one of the greats. because he is just so good with that, with being able to write dialogue that is just so captivatingly funny. And like I said, again, he was perfect to write for the Fourth Doctor because Tom Baker is just able to take those lines and deliver it in a way that no other actor could. But of course, like I said, it comes with having some crazy out there creative concepts as well, and some really fun characters, and some being able to embrace the goofiness and the tongue-in-cheek side of Doctor Who, but doing so in a way that feels so right. You know, he was really, really fit like a glove with the Graham Williams era as well, with the sort of tongue-in-cheek nature of it. And yeah, he really is one of my favorites, purely just for how entertaining his episodes are, basically on just his dialogue alone, really. And that's why Douglas Adams is one of my favorites. Fun fact about Douglas Adams that you'll probably get to learn about again later. He actually decided one of the names of the Pink Floyd albums because he was friends with David Gilmour.
That's neat.
Yeah. But yes, Douglas Adams is brilliant. Your number 8.
My number 8 is James Moran.
Oh, I know why this is.
Yeah, there's only really one reason why he's on the top 10 list, because I kind of have to, really, because yeah, he only wrote one episode of Doctor Who in 2008, but he also did write 2 episodes of Torchwood, so he's not completely an out of nowhere pick in the Whoniverse. But his only credit for writing in Doctor Who was the episodes The Fires of Pompeii, which is one of my favourite episodes of the entirety of Doctor Who as a whole. I absolutely adore that episode from start to finish, and I think he does such an excellent job with a clear task of beginning this relationship properly between Donna and the Doctor as a really close bond, and how important their bond is, and you know, that infused with what came before in their previous appearances together in The Runaway Bride. He does such a good job with them, dialogue wise, and you know, narratively he does an excellent job at connecting these two really well. That scene in the TARDIS between Donna and the Doctor near the end, with their conflict and back and forth, is one of my favourite scenes in the entire show. And I think both the actors bring it absolutely everything, and the dialogue for that scene is pretty spot on, I'd say. I think it's the perfect amount of seriousness based upon the events that just happened, and the fact we know where this Doctor is at this point in time. I'm incredibly impressed by his work for this episode. And it's such a cool concept as well. I think there's so many great characters, like small characters, like Pier Capaldi's character in this is quite charming, you know. I think, you know, the villain is quite funny in a lot of ways, quite in a very, like, plain way. Like, it's like, he's a very strange character, clearly, but there's something about him that is quite interesting to think about. And yeah, I think there's a lot of comedic stuff in this episode too that is just so well built off the chemistry of Catherine Tate and David Tennant. They do such a bloody brilliant job with those two. And yeah, I think Jason Moran does such an excellent job with this story that I kind of have to credit him in my top 10 because it's one of my favourite episodes. It'd feel unjust if I didn't. So yeah, it's a shame it's the only one he ever wrote, but yeah, I really love that episode a lot.
I have seen Sleeper. It's been about 4 or 5 years, so it's been a very long time. I remember it being decent. And then he obviously co-wrote Children of Earth Day 3 with Russell T Davies, and I've heard nothing but good things about that, so I'll take everyone's word for it.
Yeah, I'm really impressed by his work in that episode, because I think it's such an important episode in that point in time, not only for Donna's introduction to now time travel, but the Doctor himself. I think that's quite an important episode, you know, especially when it eventually goes into Waters of Mars. You know, I think that's quite a important episode, and I think Jason Moran does a great job. Really, I think he really does, and it leaves quite an impact on me every time I watch it. I'm just like, I wish he did more. I really wish he did a couple more stories going forward, but it's a real shame.
Yes. Very good. Alright then, my number 8 is quite a unique one. It is Kit Pedler, the man behind the Cybermen. Kit Pedler was more than just a writer, he was also a scientist first. And so, a bit like how I mentioned John Lucarotti being such a master expert on history, and hence why his historicals are so in-depth and so well-regarded and so brilliant with its not only its accuracy, but its ability to create TV drama out of it. Kit Pedler is the same with the sci-fi side of Doctor Who, and he is the original creator of the Cybermen, and the stories that came out of his scientific ideas are really, really, really interesting. Especially with things like the 10th Planet, the Moon Base, the Tomb of the Cybermen, the Wheel in Space, which I haven't seen, and then the Invasion. I haven't seen the Wheel in Space, but the other 4 60 Cybermen stories I have seen, and I love all of them. They are such a both scientifically interesting and in-depth, but also really, really creepy characterization for the Cybermen. They also mark some really monumental and iconic moments for the first and second Doctor as well. He also came up with the concept of the War Machines, which is another first Doctor story that's based on scientific stuff that is then taken by Ian Stewart Black and written. And yeah, and stuff like, you know, the Wheel in Space and the Invasion is taken by David Whittaker and, you know, Derek Sherwin, and with the 10th Planet, the Moon Base, and the Tube and the Cybermen, Jerry Davis also did that. So there is a bit of an asterisk to this, because he always needed a second person with him to write all of these stories, because he's not a solo writer, he's more of a concept guy. But the concepts he came up with, specifically the Cybermen, is one of the best concepts in the entire show. And the stories that he helmed are so good at getting the Cybermen right, like to an insane level. I think he deserves a lot of credit for using scientific journals and being able to capture such a unique and memorable idea. Yeah, and I just really enjoy all the episodes that I've seen him be involved in. So I really, really, really like Kit Pedler in a lot of ways. He's kind of like the opposite to Douglas Adams in a way, because Douglas Adams is all about the creating the unusual and the insane and the crazy, whereas Kit Pedler came up with a concept that is something that genuinely could happen to us. You know, it's almost like his Cyberman stories, in some ways, especially the early ones, feel like a future historical, because the Cybermen as a concept feels like something that we could easily be heading towards, and already are in some ways already heading towards. And so it just adds such a realism to the storytelling. Yeah, he's a proper genius, and a fantastic writing concept person. And I love what he's contributed to Doctor Who. So yeah, Kit Pedler's my number 8 for that.
Alright. Okay. Alright. This is going to be a quite a big one, because there's going to be a bit of explanation to do, because it's quite a heavy one. And yeah, it's the person who's written the most Doctor Who stories out of anybody else in its entirety.
Oh, of course.
My number 7 is Stephen Moffat. Now, this is quite an interesting pick, because there's a lot of baggage with Stephen Moffat, as we all know. If you ever watched this channel many times, you know
he's written a lot of bad Doctor Who.
Yes, but he has written a lot of good Doctor Who, especially in his early career. I think all the episodes he's written over Russell T Davies, I think, are quite brilliant. Especially stuff like Girl in the Fireplace and Science and Library / Forest of the Dead. I think those two especially are quite underrated in a lot of ways. And obviously, Empty Child, The Doctor Dances, which is first outing, and it was quite incredible. And Blink is a very iconic idea and story.
He also did Time Crash as well during that time.
Yeah, he also did Time Crash, which was a very neat little mini. Because I remember watching all of the Fifth Doctor era, and then I watched that last, and I was like, I really got emotional during that because that's quite an on. Yeah, I really enjoyed that a lot because it felt right for the Fifth Doctor. Obviously, during his show-running days, he did write a couple of really good stories. Obviously, like Heaven Sent. Obviously, Wide Enough for Time and The Doctor Falls. He obviously wrote a lot of, 11th Hour is quite a banger, I would say. And Pandora Opera is a big bang I really enjoy. However, he has written some quite big stinkers in his time, like Hellbent.
Mm-hmm. The Wedding of River Song.
The Time of the Doctor. The Wedding of River Song. Let's Kill Hitler.
Mm-hmm. Doctor Within the Wardrobe.
Doctor Within the Wardrobe. Twice Upon a Time.
The Return of Doctor Mysterio.
The Magician's Apprentice and Witch's Familiar.
The Name of the Doctor, The Bells of St. John, The Snowmen, The Angels Take Manhattan, Asylum of the Daleks.
Yeah, there's a lot of shite there. It would, despite how
deep breath and listen need a shout to. They have some pretty bad elements there.
True. Yeah, those are pretty bad. But despite all that, I would feel unjust to not at least have him on the list because I think he has written some of the best episodes the show has produced. Mostly in his early days, really. You know, before he really took over the show as showrunner. I think is probably where he peaks a lot, other than probably Heaven Sent. So yeah, I think Moffat can write well a lot of the time when he's really focused on the story and what its purpose is. And he is a good dialogue writer when he tries. When he doesn't and he kind of mucks around,
well,
he can.
I think Jay put it best. He's a good dialogue writer when the dialogue fits the character.
Exactly. Sometimes he doesn't really know.
And that's the difference between Stephen Moffat and Douglas Adams for me. Is that Douglas Adams' dialogue always fit the character really well.
Yeah. He is very flawed as a writer. He's very flawed. But he is a writer who can, every so often, clearly, can produce some brilliant material. So, I do think he is up there in terms of the best writers, but he's also down in terms of one of the worst.
Yeah.
He's quite a bag of mystery.
Also, really. we forgot to mention Death in Heaven.
Yeah, Death in Heaven is yeah, that did happen.
Also, Sherlock is really overrated. Really overrated.
I've not seen any of Sherlock, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that Moffat, when he really tries, when he really puts all his all in and understands what is happening in the story at that point in time and what he's actually writing, he is a brilliant writer a lot of the time. But when he doesn't, a lot of the other time, he can really fumble the bag in a lot of bad ways, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Moffat as a guest writer during the RTD era was genuinely one of the best ever, I think.
Oh, absolutely. It was up there.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So yeah, number 7, Stephen Moffat. Very, very strange pick, I'd say, for me.
I understand it. I understand why you're doing that. It's just it comes with a massive asterisk.
It comes with a lot of baggage. Stephen Moffat, really, he does.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. He is much like his stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, my number 7 is Mr. Dennis Spooner. I was talking before about Douglas Adams being one of the best comedy writers, but Dennis Spooner also has this trait in spades. Dennis Spooner is not only famous for his Doctor Who, but he did a lot of TV back in the 60s. He also wrote many scripts for Thunderbirds as well, which is another series that I was a big fan of, and I really liked his episodes on that show too. Some of his dialogue is just so... He's just able to come up with these really long scenes of all these jokes that link together, and just somehow everything just escalates and gets funnier and funnier and funnier and funnier. And his back catalogue of television is absolutely massive. If you look at his Wikipedia, he did so much television from the 60s to the 80s. Just a fantastic writer. But in terms of Doctor Who, he did The Reign of Terror, The Romans, The Time Meddler, The Daleks' Master Plan, and The Power of the Daleks. He co-wrote the last two with Terry Nation and David Whittaker. But to focus primarily on his work on The Reign of Terror, The Romans, and The Time Meddler, and he was also the script editor for season 2, which was notably a lot more comedic than the first season. First season was David Whittaker, was very character focused. I think that actually worked really well in their favor to have it that way around. But Dennis Spooner, with his historicals, is that he, unlike John Le Carrotti, his weren't as historically accurate, but what they were massive liberties taken. He established what it was like to do the comedy historical, to just take a piece of history and have as much fun with it as you possibly can. And just the way that he was able to make William Hartnell's Doctor so cheerful and funny and witty, and just get involved in these ludicrously funny situations. I think The Romans is a good shout for one of the funniest Doctor Who stories ever. It's right up there with a bunch of other ones. And The Time Meddler is my favorite Hartnell story. In that story, he introduced the first Time Lord outside of the Doctor and Susan. So the first other character in the entire canon to have a TARDIS. He introduced the Meddling Monk, and the Meddling Monk in the Time Meddler is a brilliant character. I love everything about that story, and just everything about Dennis Spooner. The way he writes dialogue, the way he writes characters, it's also charming. And it's so fluid and effortless, and the episodes he writes, there's no weight on it. It's just such a fun experience to watch his television. And I just think Dennis Spooner just adds such a great touch to all the television he writes, not just Doctor Who, but elsewhere. And there's just so many memorable scenes that just put me in bellies of laughter, and he's the kind of writer where anything he does I can just put on and escape from the angst of real life and just have a fun time. And there's just something about the way he writes that is both very, very, very funny, but it also doesn't sacrifice anything when it comes to character. He still maintains that level of integrity with the characterization and the show it is in. He doesn't have to make massive, jarring moments to create comedy. Chris Chibnall. He's able to actually write something that is fitting of the characters and fitting of the show, but also be very funny in his own way, put his own spin on things. And I think just his take on the comedy historical is just so much fun. It's just such a wonderful writer, Dennis Spooner, I think. I mean, with a name like that, you just gotta imagine he's a funny guy with a name like Dennis Spooner. It's just calling for laughter. Yeah, he's great. Your number 6.
My number 6 is Toby Whithouse.
Oh yes, Toby Whithouse.
Yes, he has written quite a lot of Doctor Who in the modern age. He obviously wrote episodes like School Reunion, The Vampires of Venice, The God Complex, A Town Called Mercy, Under the Lake / Before the Flood, and the Lie of the Land. Yeah, we'll just ignore that one. I really like his 4 of those stories are like criminally underrated, I'd say. School Reunion, I think, is such a great introduction into what Tennant finally really starting to show inklings of what kind of Doctor he's going to be, really. Especially when you pair him with Sarah Jane. I think they wrote her back into this world really well. I think he did a fantastic job with that. And obviously, with an episode like the God Complex, you know, it's such a quite creatively brilliant story.
It's the 11th Doctor at his best.
Yeah, really, it really is. I think Matt Smith gives quite the performance, and the concept surrounding it, how absurd it is in a lot of ways, but how meaningful it is for the three, the Doctor, Amy, and Rory at that point. Obviously, with the scene of, you know, between him and Amy, with Amy's faith in the Doctor being the component of that story, I think it's quite a beautifully written scene. And obviously with the ending of that, him kind of sending them away and giving them an actual life, which unfortunately is not really paid off with in any way going forward, but hey ho. Yeah, I really enjoy a lot of his work. A Town Called Mercy as well is quite underrated. It has that scene between him and Amy in that season, in that episode, talking about how the Doctor's sort of changing. I think both of them give quite great performances, both Karen Gillan and Matt Smith. And the dialogue is very, very good.
By far the standout of Series 7, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And he is obviously the original creator of the Gunslinger, like, because I think he gets credited later in another story, probably maybe mentioned in passing, but obviously he created that on his own, which I think is quite a interesting idea. And I think it's executed pretty well, I'd say. Obviously, with something like Lie of the Land is yeah, it's not a great way to send off, I would say, for old Toby there. No, you know, it's quite a disappointing ending to quite a pretty good run of episodes overall. Quite a consistent standard, I'd say, for him. You know, even Vampires of Venice, I think, is pretty flawed in a lot of ways, but it's got some standout moments. But then it's got a lot of flaws, mainly probably because of Moffat, I'd imagine, inserting his hand in a lot of ways. It wouldn't surprise me too much.
Yeah,
if that was the case.
Again, The Lie of the Land is one where he was given the third part of a trilogy. You know, he's having to collaborate with Moffat and Peter Harness, so that is a showrunner. Yeah. And obviously, Stephen Moffat's mum passed away during Series 10's writing phase, so unfortunately, they weren't able to collaborate to do that three-parter properly, which is why Extremis is the only one that feels like it's actually fully cooked.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of his strengths as well is his dialogue. He knows how to write really good, complex dialogue that doesn't feel out of character, that doesn't feel unnatural to the story that he's writing. And he knows how to write comedy. I think School Reunion has a lot of really good comedy, and you know, between him writing obviously Rose and Sarah Jane in that, I really enjoyed the back and forth. I think it's really funny. I think their back and forth, listing off all the aliens they face, is I've really
I think it really showed Russell's trust in him to do an episode that was that important.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
He also did an episode of Torchwood called Greeks Bearing Gifts, which I believe was the last one that Jake reviewed before he stopped being on the channel. So I think we do have a video of that. It's the one with that's focused mainly around Tosh, I think, and it's got the like the Greek thing. It's hard to explain if you haven't seen it.
The Greek thing.
Yeah, it's like this angel thing from a bracelet. I can't remember. It's been a while. Anyway. Yeah, Toby Whithouse is a solid choice. I think he has a few bumps in the road, but School Reunion, The God Complex, A Town Called Mercy, and Under the Lake Before the Flood is nothing to, it's nothing to snuff about. That's some quality Doctor Who right there.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Right. My number 6 is the iconic, the wonderful, the memorable Terrence Dicks. Terrence Dicks, Uncle Terrence. So he was most known for being the script editor for the entire Jon Pertwee era, but he also had his own individual stories outside of that. He co-wrote with Malcolm Hulke, The War Games, my favorite Doctor Who story. He did Robot, the first Tom Baker story, another important story to do. He did The Brain of Morbius with Robert Holmes. He did Horror of Fang Rock, another banger. He did State of Decay, season 18. And he did The Five Doctors, which is also another really important story. And he's done a whole bunch of stuff in the EU, like Time Worm Exodus, Blood Harvest, Shakedown, The Eight Doctors, and Endgame. But in terms of his stuff on TV, I think it's all really consistently good. I think something that Terrence Dicks understands really well is character. I think he's able to also do world building and pacing beautifully. It's why I think the Jon Pertwee era is considered one of the most consistent runs in the show, is because Terrence Dicks was overseeing all of it as script editor. I think Terrence Dicks is able to come up with some really memorable, iconic lines of dialogue. That's one of my favorite things about the Doctor's dialogue in Robot, is the way Terrence Dicks does it all. You know, there's so many memorable lines from Terrence, and you know, he just has such a consistent quality about everything he touches in this show. The only reason why he's number 6 and why I didn't rate him higher, because I think there's an argument for him to be rated higher based on his work, is there's this one thing that he said. And he said it in sort of interviews and whatnot about the Doctor, is that, and I know death to the author applies, so within the stories he wrote, I don't really agree with him anyway, but he sees the Doctor as this sort of Mary Sue paragon, and he describes the Doctor as being never cruel, never cowardly, which I think is a load of bullshit. And I think it was smart for Russell T Davies to subvert that and have, you know, Coward Any Day and Parting the Ways, and then also for Stephen Moffat to take the idea of never cruel or cowardly as a phase, as something the Doctor strives for but isn't actually all the time, like Terrence
That's
puts
something
it.
he tries to be, and he tries his best to be that.
Yeah.
There's a bit more complexity to it.
Yeah.
He is that.
Yeah, whereas if you look at the Planet of the Spiders special features, he goes on about how he disagrees with Barry Letz's decision to do, you know, Buddhist inner control and, you know, facing your own past and your ego and your hubris and blah, 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 whatever. And Terrence Dicks said something along the lines of, you know, I think the Doctor is perfect and has no flaws, which I think is ridiculous. Even the third Doctor, that's not the case at all. So that's my one gripe with Terrence, is I think he's wrong about the Doctor's character. I think he's wrong to say he doesn't have flaws and doesn't have deficiencies, because I think the Doctor has a lot of deficiencies and a lot of flaws, and that's what makes the character interesting. Funnily enough, it's part of what makes the character so interesting in episodes that Terrence Dicks himself wrote. So I don't really understand where this is coming from, but regardless, his stories are great. His run in the Pertwee era as script editor is legendary. And he's contributed so much to this franchise, you know, novelizing so many stories in prose form. And he was such a lovely guy. And like I said, he co-wrote my favorite Doctor Who story, so he has to be on this list just for that alone, if not for everything else. And he's such a key and important writer in the history of the show, and was there for so many important moments throughout the 70s especially. So yeah, my number 6 is Terrence Dicks. Legend. What is your number 5?
Oh, well, my number 5 is Tom McRae.
Oh, yes.
So, he was pretty much fighting with Toby to be either 5th or 6th. I think I gave him the edge, mainly because I think he only wrote 2 stories for the show. He wrote Rise of the Cybermen / Age of Steel and The Girl Who Waited. And I think the reason why I've just put him above it is because I think he is, with the stories that we have, they're both very consistent, with Girl Who Waited being generally a top tier story. It is incredibly important for the companions in that story. It's a very companion heavy episode, and I think he does such an excellent job at that, which is kind of the same with Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel. It's a very companion heavy and important episode. McRae does such a good job with companions with these two stories. He knows how to write conflicts with the companions, and he knows how to lead them to certain decisions. You know, with Age of Steel, it leads with Mickey leaving, and he gives a lot of really good reasoning as to why he's left, based upon all the evidence he has in his entire run. You know, that final scene with Rose at the end is quite touching. It's a really, really good scene. You know, it shows that there's a lot of history there that we've seen over that season and a half, and it's quite a meaningful goodbye, I'd say, because they generally don't think they're going to see each other again. And yeah, it's a really, really enjoyable scene, that is. But overall, the story as well is very interesting. I think he does write the Cybermen in a really new and interesting way. Obviously, with this being a parallel universe, a slightly altered Cybermen, but still with that coldness of them, that cold, dark, hollow sort of feeling with them. I think he does a fantastic job with that, with setting up, obviously, them coming back in the finale of that season. He does a really good job. And then obviously with Girl Who Waited is a very, very interesting concept of a companion being left behind, and we get the immediate, like what's the word? I've lost the word. Repercussions of that in quite an immediate effect, in an interesting way. And the conflict between old Amy and Rory is I really enjoy it. I think it's done in such a very respectful but clever way, and sort of old Amy's look on the Doctor, based upon all the years she was alone, is it's a very believable way of thinking in that sense. You know, it's all the idea of, well, there's people that he leaves behind in places probably not ideal, and we get a sort of like immediate whiplash of that, which I think he does such a great job with. You know, yeah, quite a underrated writer, I'd say. I think
it's interesting.
Knows how to write companions.
It's interesting. The thing that he does really well is he's really good at writing the third wheeling boyfriend, because Rise of the Cybermen, The Age of Steel is my favorite story for Mickey's character, and The Girl Who Waited is my favorite story for Rory's character.
Yeah, he does a really good job with dealing with like a lot of characters around the stories, and how to use the idea of an already established like third wheel element to them, and using that to enhance their stories, their own individual characters. I think he does such a really good job with that. He's one of those writers who just knows how to write a companion in these kind of settings.
Oh yeah,
that's sort of his strength, really.
Yeah, I mean,
they're quite Doctor Light. Both of these stories are quite Doctor Light in a lot of ways. Obviously, with Rise of Cybermen, the Doctor obviously is around and he's active, but he's not the main figure of that story. It's Rose and Mickey, and then Girl Who Waited is Amy and Rory. So yeah, I'm really impressed with how he writes companions, and if he came back again to do another companion story, you know, I'd be up for that. I would be.
It's interesting because he submitted a script for series 4 called Century House that didn't make it. So I wonder if Russell would be interested in having him redo that script again. You know, when Russell comes back, that'd be interesting to see if that could happen. Because, you know, knowing what Tom McRae's history is like, it would be interesting to see if, you know, having that unreleased story as a...
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
And obviously, you know, he did write that script for the 10th Doctor and Donna, but, you know, there's a way you can rework it for, say... Well, to be fair, the 10th Doctor and Donna are already coming back, but I doubt that would happen. I think Russell's probably going to write all 3 episodes therein. But I think for Ncuti Gatwa and Ruby Sunday, you know, you could resurrect Century House and see how that was, because I'd be keen to see it, or just anything with Tom McRae, because he's really good at what he does.
Agreed.
It's a valuable writer. Alright, my number 5 is David Whittaker, one of the key writers from early Doctor Who. He was the script editor for the first ever season, but he also wrote a bunch of his own stories as well. He did... Let me just find it. He did The Edge of Destruction, The Rescue, The Crusade, The Power of the Daleks, The Evil of the Daleks, The Enemy of the World, The Wheel in Space, and The Ambassadors of Death. So he wrote for the first 7 seasons of the show. What David Whittaker gets so right is character. In every single one of these stories that he does, he's great with character, and he's written some very monumental moments, probably the most of which being The Power of the Daleks, being the one to be the writer responsible for introducing a new Doctor for the first time, and he did it to absolute perfection, crafting the second Doctor as a reaction to Hartnell. And also, he's one of the best writers for characterizing the Daleks as well. The Daleks in both Power and Evil are really devious, really cunning, but also really well written and very strong in their own right. And he does different things in each story. He's so good at characterizing the mischievous and facial expression tells 1,000 words thing with Troughton in season 4. He also, having written The Enemy of the World, is able to come up with this idea to have this actor play 2 roles. He's so good with world building.
Yeah.
And with him script editing the first season, he oversaw the character development of the original TARDIS team, which is such an important thing, especially with an episode like The Edge of Destruction being those 4 characters stuck inside the TARDIS for 2 episodes and just dealing with the stress of that. It's such a showcase of him being able to write character without any real plot to bolster that. And then, of course, you got stuff like The Rescue, which has the aftermath of Susan's exit and the introduction of Vicky, which is really great character writing in there. And then he obviously wrote a pure historical called The Crusade, which is one of my favorite historicals. It has some of my favorite dialogue, some of my favorite acting. It's fantastic. Beautiful story. I haven't seen The Wheel in Space, but again, talking about monumental, he wrote The Cybermen, and he also wrote the introduction of Zoe as well. So that's another monumental thing. And there's something like The Ambassadors of Death. Again, it's just a whole nother story. Something completely different to anything he did before, but, you know, the way he writes this sort of grounded, gritty unit story with the third Doctor, Liz Shaw, and the Brigadier, and just the whole conspiracy behind it is just so interesting. And I just think Whittaker has a way of being able to blend character and world building to his advantage with many different scales. Sometimes they're really small scale, sometimes they're big scale, and he also has a variety as well, whether that be a character piece, or that be a pure historical, or whether that be a sci-fi story with the Daleks and the Cybermen, or whether that be, you know, a future dystopian story, or whether that be a modern day Earth gritty political drama, espionage. You know, he just has so much in the bag, and I think David Whittaker is just such a success, and he was an essential part of the very early years of the show, given that he was so important to writing the first season. So yeah, he's brilliant. Of the stories, I know you've seen The Enemy of the World. I can't remember if you've seen any of the others.
I don't believe I have. No.
I think you got close to seeing The Ambassadors of Death. Almost.
Well, you know what's so funny? When I used to do the Classic Who reactions, the first ever story that was actually picked was The Edge of Destruction.
Right.
But unfortunately, I didn't have... it wasn't available on Amazon Prime at the time, so I couldn't even... And I wanted to do it the day of, so I couldn't even get like a DVD, so I had to skip to I got an episode I could watch, which was The Enemy of the World.
Right, yeah. Well, it's also another David Whittaker, so it was meant to be.
Yeah, quite interesting there.
Yes. But yeah, David Whittaker is
Yeah,
fantastic.
Enemy of the World is very fucking good. Very good.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, he is just one of the best character writers in the show, for sure. He's just... All of his characters are so rich, especially given the time period. We're talking a man who's writing in the 1960s, and his characters are just... Oh, they're so rich. For 1960s BBC TV, that isn't exactly... You know, obviously, if you look at someone like Tolkien or Frank Herbert, that's different, because they have years and years and years and years to craft these big novels, right? But we're talking about scripts handed into the BBC within weeks. This guy writes characters that are just so fleshed out and so beautiful. And he was great at writing Hartnell and Troughton and Pertwee. He did a fantastic job with all three of them. David Whittaker, one of the greats. Brilliant writer. Who is your number 4?
My number 4 really only recently has got onto the list, but I'm so impressed with his work that I kind of had to. My number 4 is Robert Holmes.
Yes. Most iconic Who writer of all time.
Yeah, I've only seen about 4 stories in total of what is of his work, which were Spearhead from Space, The Ark in Space, Piers of Mars, and The Caves of Androzani. Yeah, I feel like Ark in Space really... I think he would have been on the list, but I think he's bumped up quite a few places because I'm so impressed with his dialogue. How he really is ahead of his time in terms of his like dialogue writing. I'm so impressed with his interaction with characters, how they talk, especially. Just feels like so... Like I think I said this to you yesterday. I said this, but I could honestly see any Doctor from modern times be slotted in to a Robert Holmes story, and the dialogue is so well suited to the Doctor as a whole, where they just slot right in, and it feels so natural. He's such a talented writer. He's got great ideas, and he knows how to write characters. He really was ahead of his time. He's such a talented writer. Obviously, Caves of Androzani. Man, what a story that is.
That's his magnum opus, Caves of Androzani. It's unbelievable.
Pretty much. It's shockingly incredible how good that is. Yeah. What a way to end off such a great Doctor, honestly. But even just stuff that he, like, you know, Ark in Space is such a quite an interesting idea, but the character interactions are so bloody good. So well paced, so well structured. Plot just so coherent and so well developed. Yeah, I'm excited to see more of his stuff going forward, because the stuff that I have seen of him, he knows how to write characters, he knows how to write plots. You know, very, 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 very talented writer. So important for the show as well, with the amount of, you know, stories he's written. You know, I mean, on Wikipedia he says he wrote 15 and a half stories, you know.
Oh yeah.
Such an influential person on the show, so important for the show. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, what very talented writer.
Yeah, well, when you go through, you know, Doctor Who fans, and when they do like their favorite writers, his name comes up a lot. Yeah. A lot.
Honestly, if he was like alive today and he wrote for like modern Who, he'd slot right in. Honestly, he's such a versatile writer.
Well, he's so timeless, really, is the word to use.
Yeah.
And it's also because I think so much of Doctor Who that's come since then, the 80s and New Who, is so influenced by Robert Holmes.
Yeah. Like, I would love to see what a Capaldi episode written by Robert Holmes would be. That would be so fucking good. That would be.
Yep.
Honestly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't speak more highly of him, honestly, from the stuff I've seen.
Yeah. I'll get to him later.
Yeah,
Don't you worry.
Yeah. I mean, that's no shock.
My number 4 is Malcolm Hulke, the other half of the War Games. Malcolm Hulke is known as a political writer. In fact, I believe he was even part of the Labour Party at one point, or at least he was in Parliament for the, he was certainly a progressive politician, let's just say that much. But yes, Malcolm Hulke is a legendary writer. I fucking love his stories. He did the Faceless Ones, he did the War Games, he did Doctor Who and the Silurians, he did the Ambassadors of Death with a bunch of other writers. That was a big collaboration. He did Colony in Space, he did the Sea Devils, he did Frontier in Space, and he did Invasion of the Dinosaurs. So what Malcolm Hulke gets so right is politics in everything, except for maybe the Sea Devils. I think that's more of a fun sort of action story. But in everything else he does, the political elements of the stories are so fine-tuned, and they are so... He just understands everything about humanity and the political side of humanity to its literal scrutinized detail. And he's so good at writing characters, and he's so good at world building, and he's so good at writing plots that tie into that world building. And the way he's able to, the versatility of the way he's able to write the Second Doctor as being devious and cunning and be able to manipulate his way around these harsh political situations, like in the Faceless Ones, when all of these university students going on holiday are being stolen and taken to space and replaced by chameleons. Or you've got something like in the War Games, when you've got all of these different wars from history being assorted into a Venn diagram by the Time Lords, and having the Doctor having to lie about who he is and where he is and who he's with, and having to dart his way around the entire story, trying to get his way out of getting into shit in so many different scenarios of different characters, and being able to balance the absolutely momentous weight of all these stories. Like, every single one of these stories is a minimum of 6 parts long. Like, they are all long form Doctor Who. And he's able to balance having lots of characters and lots of locations and lots of moving parts. Then you got something like Doctor Who and the Silurians, an absolutely beautiful tale about tribalism, about rights to land, about, you know, indigenous species and cultures and who has the right to what. It's such a beautiful conflict for the Doctor between humanity and the indigenous of Earth, the Silurians. It's a brilliant political story. Obviously, his hand in the Ambassadors of Death is known. With Colony in Space, great world building, being able to apply politics to a future scenario on an alien planet, being able to set up a mining corporation and show the dark side of when a colonizing group, you know, is ripping and tearing out all of the resources for their own benefit, and having the two different human factions, one that want peaceful, you know, living together on a planet, and the other one wanting to take everything for themselves, and balancing that with the indigenous tribe again. Colony in Space and Frontier in Space, both being stories that inspired George Lucas when writing Star Wars because of how they shape alien world building with politics. Obviously, with Frontier in Space being an absolute beautiful masterpiece and one of my favorite stories of the Master. I love the space travel, I love the big adventure, I love the draconian conflict and all the lying and deception, and the way that how people are pushed to a pressure boiling point when they are lied to and deceived is something he's great at doing. And then Invasion of the Dinosaurs, again, is a whole thing about overpopulation, the genocide factor, and then having a unit civil war with Mike Yates turning to the fascist side of thinking, I want to live in a better world than the one we're in, and this temptation is overriding me, and having the Doctor despise him for that, and having him, you know, excommunicated from UNIT because of it is such an interesting bit of long-term character development and payoff, really, and is just so much there. And he's also really good with companions too, you know, how he was able to have a one-off companion in Samantha Briggs, who's played by the same actress who plays Queen Victoria in Tooth and Claw, by the way, and having her exist within one story and then exit and feeling like her whole character is fulfilled. He's great with Jamie and Zoe. He's fantastic with Liz Shaw and Joe Grant and Sarah Jane Smith, and especially the Brigadier. But just the way he's able to entangle the Doctor in political scenarios and do long-form storytelling with it is absolutely masterful, and I love watching Malcolm Hulke's Doctor Who. so good. And the Sea Devils, whilst I think it's not as clever as his other stories, it is certainly a lot of fun. He wrote the iconic sword fight between the Doctor and the Master, which is a really memorable, moment, and it's such a fun thing that fans love to reference because it's just such a, it's such a visually memorable piece of the show. So yeah, Malcolm Hulke's legend. Brilliant stuff. Just so good. Love him. That's why he's my number 4. Who is your number 3?
My number 3 is Paul Cornell.
Great choice.
Yeah, no. For me, no surprise. He wrote probably 2 of the most important episodes, I think, for certain characters. Father's Day and Human Nature / The Family of Blood. So, first off, on Father's Day, boy, what an episode that is for Rose. Holy shit. That's so fucking good. With the whole setup of small little hints about Rose's father throughout the first sort of 6 episodes. When this hits you, it hits you hard with the entire backstory of Rose's family all in one episode. And Pete Tile is such a great character in that episode, and really it being just one episode, he goes through a full arc of his own, and this appreciation for his family, getting to see his daughter all grown up as an idea is so well executed. Absolutely. The chemistry between all the actors is fantastic, but Paul Cornell does such a good job with side characters. Just an entire story about side characters, and it's so well done. Christopher Eccleston takes a back seat, but he still has some great scenes in this episode, like the one with the married couple.
I think Eccleston in Father's Day is one of the most underrated Doctor performances in the show.
Agreed, because he doesn't have as much screen time, but when he does talk and when he does have scenes, he's bringing out some banger acting, I'd say. Just absolutely incredible stuff. But yeah, with the writing for Rose, for Pete, and for Jackie at times as well, there's some really clever, emotional stuff there that is so well executed. Yeah, that scene of him actually going to sacrifice himself knowingly is so good. It's so well structured, so well paid off, and the acting just supports all that. It's so bloody good. But then you've got quite the step up, I'd say, with Human Nature / The Family of Blood, which is quite the different kind of episode, but with so much impact on for me especially. But fuck me, what an interesting concept to make the Doctor act human and be human, and that be the real conflict. Man, that's such a cool idea. Obviously he adapted it from the novel that he wrote for the 7th Doctor, but adapting that for Tennant, man, it feels so well suited for him. It's such a well suited 10th Doctor idea, and how he changes it to make it work. Yeah, I'm so fucking impressed with that story. Obviously all the side characters too, and the villains. Let's not forget about the certain Baines character. What a character he is, what a villain he is. So well performed by Mr. Lloyd.
That's right.
He's so fucking good. It's just such an interesting character. The Family of Blood are such an interesting bunch of characters, and how the writing and mannerisms of those characters are performed by the actors is so iconic in a lot of ways. So memorable.
Harry Lloyd is
talking. That's a good girl.
Yeah. So Harry Lloyd is one of the rare actors that was able to have a great role in both Doctor Who and Game of Thrones.
Yeah, and Arcane as well.
Oh yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, he's such a great actor, and the story really complements his ability of range. You know how at first when he does play the normal Bane's character, how like so British he is. It's like, oh, good heavens, hello, there's someone there, you know. But then you get that turn of when he turns into, you know, the family of blood, and fuck, he delivers hard, and the writing really complements
he plays a walking scarecrow that can talk to you. Really, is what he's doing
really well. Yep.
Yeah.
And obviously with one of the highlights as well, Martha Jones goes on quite a journey in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, she goes on the journey of like sort of really realizing she has fallen for the Doctor and is trying her hardest to, you know, save him, doing everything she can while she's been delivered like setback after setback, you know, not just in terms of the story but by other characters in the story that just seemingly don't respect her in a lot of ways. But when she gets those scenes, especially the scene of when she proves she knows what the fuck she's talking about, it's those scenes are like, yes, she's stepping up and she's really grown since that first episode, even though she's quite a strong woman, clearly established very early on. The journey she goes through, and you know, the torment she has to endure a lot of the time, and how that's really changed her in some ways, some for the better but some for the worse. Obviously, as she mentions in the last episode, how that sort of toxic side of the friendship with the Doctor has sort of made her blind to the caring of her parents and family. Yeah, this is an episode that really supports that, and I think, you know, Cornell does such a good job with it. He knows, again, there's a big theme with a lot of these picks here. They just mainly know how to write characters, and it's one of those things in Doctor Who that I feel like a lot of the online fandom really miss, how important well-written characters are.
Yeah.
And all these writers that we've picked today all have moments of they completely understand where the character is in those particular points and how to advance them and develop them into what they end up being by the end of their runs. And I think Paul Cornell is no different with these two stories.
Yep, he's also well known for some other stuff too. He did Scream of the Shulker, which is an oddity, with Richard E. Grant playing the Doctor and Derek Jacobi playing the Master, but not the Utopia Master. That also has David Tennant in it as an extra. And then he also did books called, like a bunch of books and audios. He did Time Worm Revelation, which is highly regarded. He did Love and War, which is one of the most highly regarded Virgin New Adventures. He's known for writing some of the best stuff of Bernie Summerfield in Love and War and Human Nature. He also did goth opera. He did Big Finish, like The Shadow of the Scourge. He did Seasons of Fear, which is a great Eighth Doctor story. He also did a story called Circular Time, which is also really highly regarded. So yeah, he's done some really, really popular Doctor Who material. Paul Cornell has. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Another writer I would like to come back and write another story.
Oh, 100%, yes. I get... The only thing with Paul Cornell for me is I find some of his tweets annoying and I find some of his interviews annoying, but his actual contributions to the show have been fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think also it's probably valuable to be said that Cornell's TV stuff was heavily edited by Russell T Davies. Probably because of the characters that were in it. But, you know, that's not to discredit his work, because his work is still great.
No.
Yeah.
I think clearly under Russell, he, like Moffat did when he wrote under Russell, he writes some really good stuff, and Russell knows what to allow and what is appropriate for his ideas for the story that he wants.
Yes.
It's what makes Russell such a good showrunner.
Yes. Right, so with these top three for me, we get to the 3 R's, and these have been my top 3 for a very long time. The first of which is number 3, which is Mr. Robert Shearman. Mr. Robert Shearman, what a man, what a writer. Everything this man touches is absolute gold. Obviously, his most known work is the TV story Dalek, which is an absolute masterpiece. It's one of the best Dalek stories of all time. It gives the Doctor some of the best character of all time. He writes Rose Tyler fantastically. The whole Henry Van Staten character is excellent. That whole episode is monumental in so many ways at establishing things in New Who, and it just completely changed the whole show. It's absolutely incredible. And then you get to some of his big finish, like The Holy Terror, an absolute masterpiece. The Maltese Penguin, one of the funniest comedies in Big Finish ever. The Chimes of Midnight, an absolute masterpiece. Jubilee, an absolute masterpiece. Scherzo, an absolute masterpiece. My favorite Eighth Doctor story. Deadline, an Unbound story based on what if the people who made Doctor Who were in a Doctor Who story in real life, and the TARDIS was a wardrobe that you go to die in. It's unbelievable. And he also wrote a story for Martha Jones and the year that never was, between Sound of Drums and Last of the Time Lords, in the books called The Frozen Wastes. And he also wrote a story called My and Private Wolfgang for Big Finish as well. Everything this man touches is absolute gold, not just in Doctor Who, but outside Doctor Who. His poetry is incredible. His novels are incredible. He did a book, a Find Your Own Path book recently called We All Hear Stories in the Dark. That's like 3 spines long, where it's a novel series that is written based on, the story is told purely based on who you are. And so every single person that reads that book that he wrote is going to get a different story out of it, which I think is so unbelievably crafted to be able to do something that complex and interpretive is unbelievable. But something that I would define Robert Shearman with is he understands stakes, he understands threat, he understands villains so well. He understands the faults of humanity, not only to an insanely scrutinized level, but to a comedic level, to where a lot of his stories, especially his Big Finish, delves into dark humor in the most sadistic but also brilliantly whimsical way. He is also able to write the Doctor brilliantly, as he's able to write, the 6th Doctor to his best. He's able to write the 8th Doctor to his best. He's able to write the 9th Doctor to his best. And he's just so unbelievably, incredibly genius. And just a man who makes art out of this show. He's so intelligent, so creative, so funny, so good with characters, so good with plot, so good with world building, so good with comedy, irony, violence, everything. He's just perfect. I love Rob Shearman, and he's a fan as well. Like he doesn't sit on a high horse. Like he's right here with us. He's one of those people that you can talk to on Twitter and he will respond to you. And, if you see him in the street, he'll talk to you. He's such a nice guy. He's so humble and he's one of us, really. And, but the thing is, as much as he is, feeling like he is humble and he feels like he is just a normal person, in reality, the work he does, the stories he writes is so fucking good. All of it. It's just chef's kiss. He's about as close to a flawless writer I think this franchise has ever had. And that's why he's my number 3. Who is your number 2?
Oh, funny enough, my number 2 is Robert Sherman.
There he is.
Yeah, no surprise there. Yeah, just echoing all the same things. I think he's such a talented writer. I think to reintroduce the show's most iconic villain and write them in the way to make them so scary and threatening and just so despicable and just so deadly and just so just all of that. Dalek is one of those stories that is just, it is the closest to flawless you could probably get with a Doctor Who story. It is incredibly important for the entirety of the show going forward. At that point, I would say how important the Daleks are to not only the show, but to the Doctor as a character and the idea of the Time War. For that episode to work, it needs a lot to go right, and Robert Shearman does quite the job with adapting his Big Finish story into the TV show and suit it to what Russell needs to make everything work properly in terms of the antagonist of the Dalek. Yeah, Dalek is incredible, and it being his one and only TV credit for the show, you know, in a lot of ways is sad, but in a lot of ways is quite fitting, because I think you can't really. It would be hard to top that. It really would. But man, oh man, is it fucking good. Dalek is such a great story. And with some of the best performances the show's had, Christopher Eccleston brings everything into that episode. And, you know, direction-wise, I just loved Dalek in every way. Music, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the writing, especially for Dalek, is... It makes the Doctor really questionable. And it makes complete sense why he gets to that point. How he writes the Doctor for that is very impressive. To make him seem... Showing how the Time War has changed him a lot. And how that obviously shows going forward. With a lot of different aspects of how the Doctor's changed. But yeah, Dalek is great. And Robert Shearman... He's a fucking talented writer, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, what I can say about a lot of his stories, like Dalek, like The Holy Terror, like The Chimes of Midnight, like Jubilee, like Scherzo, like Deadline, what they all have in common is just, unlike any other writer really, apart from maybe one or two others, he just has this way of grabbing you by the throat and not letting go for the whole time. He's just such a captivating writer and such an intense writer with high volume, and just everything about what he does is so impactful and purposeful and emotionally gut-wrenching. You know, a lot of his storytelling is very dark, but it does it in a way that is so human and but yet so whimsical at the same time. But he never veers into pretentiousness either. He does these high concept things, but they are all met with a humble sense of, you know, humanity. He doesn't ever veer into over-egging anything or becoming too big for his boots. Everything he does just purely and utterly comes from a sense of genuine intelligence, genuine creativity, and just genuinely brilliant-minded writing. And it's so coherent and so just viciously personal and vividly vibrant visually with his Big Finish. There's just something about Robert Shearman that is different to everyone else. And he's really unmatched, honestly. He's really unmatched in a lot of ways. I think he has drawn a line under Doctor Who, and he says he's never coming back. But if he ever did, I'd be super excited to see what he'd do. Because he's incredible.
Certainly is.
Absolutely grabs you by the balls. Right, my number 2 is the iconic, the legendary, the one and only Robert Holmes. He is the iconic classic Doctor Who writer. He's written for so many Doctors. He wrote for Troughton, Pertwee, Tom Baker, Peter Davison, and Colin Baker. He wrote some of the most memorable stories in the entire show and came up with some of the most memorable villains in the entire show. He was there for monumental moments like Spearhead from Space, introducing the 70s, the colour Doctor Who with John Pertwee's era, and with the Autons. He was there for the origin of the Master and Terror of the Autons. He was there for the origin of Sarah Jane Smith and the Sontarans in The Time Warrior. He was there to kick off the Hinchcliffe era with the Ark in Space, and was the script editor for seasons 12 to 15 during Tom's first half. And he was there for Pyramids of Mars, The Brain of Morbius, The Deadly Assassin being the first story to be the Doctor on his own on Gallifrey as well, was a major. And not only there to, when he first introduced the Master with Delgado, but to reinvent the Master with Peter Pratt as well. He wrote The Talons of Wang Chiang, he wrote The Sunmakers, which was great. Like, he was a great writer for Leela. He wrote The Ribos Operation, The Power of Kroll, being there for parts of The Key to Time and just being able to adapt again to the Graham Williams style. The Caves of Androzani is his magnum opus. He's incredible at writing Peter Davison's Doctor, giving the perfect send-off. And I actually think his Troughton stuff was really underrated, the Crotons and the Space Pirates, as some of his later traits that would become major in his stories. Yeah, I think some of his stuff he did with Colin Baker was a bit flawed in some areas, but also very exciting and engaging in others. But what I think Robert Holmes was so good at is that what you said before about there's so many Doctors since that could have fit right into a Robert Holmes story and felt like they fit in. But it's also because he has so much versatility and that he can write for so many eras of the show with so many different tones and so many different actors playing the roles, in the way that he could do it for the Troughton era and fit in, or the Pertwee era, or the early Tom Baker era, or the late Tom Baker era, or with Peter Davison, or with Colin Baker, and he just felt like he was right for this show in every single iteration. He has great character writing, great dialogue that feels so real and right there, and so perfect for this show. It's almost like with Robert Holmes, it's like he was born to write for Doctor Who, because everything about his writing is so fitting for this show. He's characterized by having great worlds with dark characters, but also he's great with light-hearted comedy and whimsical comedy as well. And again, unlike some other writers, much like Robert Sherman, he has his own style of comedy, but it never veers into pretentious. Robert Holmes never veers into pretentious because he has such a class about him and such an iconic and legendary status and an ability to create moments that stand the test of time and be able to be there for important moments and succeed and establish things in the show that will be used for many years to come. I mean, the amount of money that this franchise has made off him succeeding in introducing concepts to this show is unreal, and the amount of influence he's had over writers like Eric Sayward, like Russell T Davies, like Stephen Moffat, like Chris Chibnall, like all of those other writers like Toby Whithouse and, you know, Paul Cornell and Robert Sherman and so many others. They all are inspired by Robert Holmes and his script writing, his ability to do plot, character, theme, world, his ability to understand the Doctor on such a specific level and be able to write dialogue that defines this character. He has left such a mark on this show, and his output is so consistent and so memorable, especially for John Pertwee, Tom Baker, and Peter Davison. His output for those three Doctors has been unbelievably good quality. And I just love it. I love his writing. I love everything he does. He's just insanely good at writing Doctor Who. He is unbelievable. That's why he's my number 2. Of course, I would imagine, if I had to hazard a guess, we probably have the same number 1, right?
I'd imagine so.
But
Unless it's some massive curveball.
And it's Chris Chibnall. Imagine. Before we get to number 1, though, that I'm sure you all know, I would like to list off a few honorable mentions. Terry Nation, Paul Cornell, Don Houghton, Christopher Bailey, Robert Banks Stewart, Chris Boucher, and Christopher H. Bidmead. All of them were really close to be on the list. Terry Nation obviously came up with the Daleks, probably his best written story being Genesis of the Daleks. Then, of course, Paul Cornell, as you stated, Father's Day, Human Nature, Family, Blood, and then stuff in the EU, like Love and War and Seasons of Fear and all that stuff. Human Nature. Don Houghton wrote Inferno and The Mind of Evil, 2 of my favourite Pertwee stories. Christopher Bailey did Kinder and Snake Dance. Robert Banks Stewart did Terror of the Zygons and The Seeds of Doom, and then for Big Finish, they adapted a story that was supposed to be on TV, The Foe from the Future, which is also a great story. Chris Boucher did The Face of Evil, The Robots of Death, and Image of the Fandal, and he was one of the defining people to establish Leela as a character as her introduction writer. And of course, Christopher H. Bidmead was the script editor for season 18. He constructed the Entropy arc, and he did Legopolis, Castrovelva, and Frontios, and he's a great scientific writer and able to establish a really interesting avant-garde concept for Tom Baker's final season that I love. I love the way that the Fourth Doctor goes out under a writer who is so in contrast to the likes of Robert Holmes and Douglas Adams before him. So yeah, those are my honourable mentions. Did you write down any honourable mentions, or are you?
I have a couple. I have Matt Jones, Richard Curtis, and Simon Neill as my honorary mentions for writers. I think they all wrote at least one or two stories. Simon Neill, if I can find his work.
Well, Simon Nye did Amy's Choice.
Yes, that's it. He did Amy's Choice, which is quite a lovely story. That
Richard Curtis obviously did Vincent and the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a very well-known writer and director. He did Love Actually, which is a very famous film.
Yes. And Matt Jones did Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit.
And he also did Dead Man Walking for Torchwood.
Ah, nice.
Yes,
so, yeah,
which is
those are my sort of three honourable mentions that I have that almost made it on to the list.
Yeah. I think the thing with Matt Jones, though, is that the Satan Pit two-parter was 99% rewritten by Russell T Davies. To credit him would be mostly, I think, on the idea of it and also on his Torchwood episode, I think. Of course, speaking of, our number one comes to the surprise of absolutely nobody, I'm sure.
No surprise. Of course, it's Peter Harness, obviously.
Oh, God, yeah, Kill the Moon, Zygon Inversion, and Pyramid at the End of the World are just such great political stories that get everything correct.
Oh, no.
They just have he just has such correct opinions on women. Anyway, let's not talk about that.
Anyway.
I think it was fitting that we did this video now, given that he's about to return.
Yes.
It's the one and only man who resurrected Doctor Who from the grave. The unbelievably talented, charismatic, funny, beautiful character writer, insane but also captivating plot writer, great world builder and thematic genius, and all-round intense, successful and popular showrunner, Russell T Davies.
Snap.
I'll let you start with this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise he's written my favourite episode of TV, really. The Wars of Mars is fucking incredible. But Russell, the effort he puts into characters and world and setup and payoff, I think the show has never had before and never had since. He has such a care to detail in almost everything he writes. He's not a perfect writer. He isn't. However, the heights he reaches with the amount of setup he puts into the characters and the world and the plots is absolutely awe-inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
Yana in Series 3. Bad Wolf in Series 1. Tortured in Series 2. And obviously with Series 4, the
bees are disappearing.
The entire build-up to that, the bees are disappearing. With that also being the build-up to Tennant's end, with the 4 knocks eventually.
Mm-hmm.
There's no writer I would be more happy to see come back and just do the show again than Russell. If it was anybody else, like if it was Stephen Moffat or anybody like that, I would be pessimistic. With Russell and the amount of work he puts into characters, not in just Doctor Who, but his other shows like It's a Sin and Years, I am so confident and so happy and so excited for the next season and next real era of the show. Honestly, him coming back honestly is that injection of life that the show needs again, much like in 2005. Because since he left, while it's been it's had its highs and it's had its moments, it's never reached the same sort of idea of what Doctor Who can be since he left. And him coming back, him writing two actors who are with so much potential, especially Ncuti Gatwa. I cannot think of a better writer / showrunner to put that at the helm, to be at the helm for all of that. I'm so excited for what he does next. I'm so excited for what kind of story he wants to tell with the Doctor again. And I want it to be different. I want it to be new. I want it to be interesting and something that really challenges what the Doctor is and what Doctor Who can be. But even just talking about his previous work, the amount of care he puts into the stories, the amount of care he puts into his characters and plot and world, I don't think any writer in Doctor Who gets close to it on a consistent basis.
I also think one thing that people really underrate about him is his ability to write theme as well. It's something that's often handed to much more sort of flowery word salad writers, but I think Russell T Davies is able to do it in a really grounded way. But he is as thematically deep as many of the other giants of, TV and Doctor Who and all that. He is able to tie all this stuff together with characters and with the whole plot of it being all a big sci-fi show, but also with it being massive world building with lots of different moving parts and whatnot. But the way he uses theme to bolster the meaning behind all his stories and give it that that polish and that beautiful takeaway every time you finish a series that he writes. You just take away so much from it because of how much flavor is there and how much thought is put into it and how the characters all have their interpersonal relationships and how it's complex and how he challenges not only the show he's writing, which he loves, but also challenges stereotypes within fiction and challenges tropes within real life, not only within social environments but political environments as well. And the way he's able to have his finger on the pulse of what people want to see is unbelievable. There's a reason why when you go to the general public and you say a Doctor Who, the things they talk about, majority of it is in this run. When you look at his work outside of that, even within stuff like Torchwood, his Torchwood episodes are really highly regarded, with stuff like Everything Changes and with the Children of Earth serial, or in like the Sarah Jane Adventures where you got stuff like Death of the Doctor. And then you look at his serials outside of, Doctor Who universe stuff. You have what to any other writer would be magnum opus after magnum opus after magnum opus with award-winning TV like Queer as Folk, a very English scandal, Years and Years, It's a Sin. And he's just so good at writing adult drama, but he's so good at writing family drama as well that's suited for children to watch, but not be insufferable and not be insulting to their intelligence. It's uplifting, it's smart, and it treats you like you are smart. He has such an idea of what this world is doing. He has such an idea of what the people in this world are thinking, and he doesn't ever dumb down his view on the world, on people, on the show, and especially on this character. And the way he is able to take this quirky, eccentric, Victorian-based traveler that was in a cult sci-fi show from the 20th century and turn it into something so different and yet so familiar at the same time. Something that feels very inspired by Robert Holmes in many ways, but is also on the same way so modern, so contemporary, so new, and so different every time he writes this character, with Christopher Eccleston's Ninth Doctor, with David Tennant's 10th and seemingly 14th Doctor, and what will probably be Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor as well. He's able to reinvent this character in new ways and do just so many brilliant things with it, and he just understands people to such a deep level, more than I think any other writer does. And yeah, he's not a perfect writer, but when he hits a high, he hits what I think are some of the biggest high this show has ever had, and it's damn impressive what he's able to achieve with all his resources, with his unbelievable attention to detail, and the way he's able to build these worlds of characters and be able to tie it all together with these really meaningful and well executed themes and some really captivating, interesting, wacky plots, and the energy and the spice and the way he uses the choice of directors and music and actors is so specific, and he always knows what he wants. He always knows exactly what he's looking for. He knows how to execute it. He knows how to bring his ideas to screen in a way that not many other writers can. And even then, this is him going back many years. You know, he was right there following in the wings at the end of Classic Who. You know, if Classic Who had gone into the 90s, he would have been a guest writer. He would have written for the Seventh Doctor. And, you know, he was there during the Virgin New Adventures years when he wrote Damaged Goods. And it's just, he's been a Doctor Who fan for life, but he's also just such a great writer in his own right, and the combination of it is so incredible. His first run on the show is my favourite. Series 1, 2, 3, 4 and the specials is some of my favourite television I've ever watched. Not just for nostalgia, but it's so rewatchable. And it's just so immersive and engaging and entertaining and so satisfying. And every time I watch it, I take something new out of it because he's just so deep with his writing. And the fact that he's coming back, I couldn't be more excited to see what he's doing. So yeah, Russell T Davies is my number one, and he's just the best. He's just the best at what he does. Back to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I pretty much agree. Even episodes that I think don't have the best plot and aren't entirely consistent, one thing I never doubt is his ability to write characters. In episodes like The Next Doctor and The End of Time, or even Planet of the Dead, or, you know, Long Game, or Boomtown, or Christmas Invasion, or New Earth, these episodes that aren't up to par to what his Leonis Heights, like Turn Left, Midnight, Waters of Mars, Gridlock, Utopia.
Bad Wolf Punning the Ways.
In all of these episodes, especially an episode like End of Time, he always understands how to write his characters. He does. And he sticks to what he wants and doesn't divert based on what probably people would think of it. Because by and large, a lot of criticism of his work is mainly his characters in certain sections of the fandom, which I just entirely disagree with, because I think Russell clearly outlines the journey of where his characters begin and end and the events that change him to get to the end point.
Yeah,
the 10th Doctor.
I think part of it is that Russell writes these characters so realistically that they hurt you as a viewer. They hurt you internally because they are such a reflection of who people are. And then to be able to do that with an alien character as well is really impressive. And I think some people underrate his abilities because they're too overwhelmed by how real his people are. And maybe that's part of the danger with his writing, is that some people can't really handle how real they are. Like
the Doctor's, the 10th Doctor specifically, his sort of hatred for guns, his hatred for violence, his sort of idea against, like, all that kind of stuff, is all based upon events that happened within the same era. The Time War is such a massive thing that fundamentally changed the Doctor, and we see the evidence of that and the clear viewpoint of him at that point of time. It's so carefully put together and making sure it works. And yeah, I cannot think of a writer who probably have the balls to do something like that, but also pay it off so well. And really establish this different kind of Doctor while keeping the same elements of this person.
Yeah.
how an event or events that happen during his run change him. The 10th Doctor specifically, how he changes from the start to the end based on every episode going forward.
Yep.
It's mightily impressive.
He reinvented
The care he has.
Reinvented how to write the Doctor. He reinvented the idea of what a companion is, with Rose, Martha, and Donna being so different to everything that came before. And I think what the companions have come since have not been able to capture that same level of depth and consistency.
But trying to. They try to be quite similar in terms of them. Some of them are quite charismatic, some of them are quite outgoing, some of them are quite... They are fine to be conflictive with the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But no writer since Russell had left, not just Chibnall, not just Moffat, but most other writers, they don't get that same level of understanding of how to execute that in different ways with different characters in different contexts than Russell.
Yeah, because
I don't think any writer
for example,
has been able to make that
this is a bit of a hot take, I will say, and not many people will agree with me on this. But this, to kind of define what I mean by this, like, I really like Bill Potts, but there's something about Rose, Martha, and Donna that just feels so real. That feels like these are people I could meet in real life. They have that level of depth.
Yeah.
You know? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, like you say with Bill, that's a good example, because there's a scene in Thin Ice that I could see Russell writing with their conflict on death. And that's the sort of thing where you get close to what Russell gets with companions consistently. The problem is that they don't ever really go more with that. They don't really establish more of an idea of the conflict or more of an understanding with a companion, understanding how alien the Doctor is or how much he's changed in their adventures. You get moments like that are so great, but they don't ever really feel like they go somewhere long term and how they end up in their ending.
And it's also really smart because he is so focused on perfecting these character encyclopedias and cause and effect of their decisions and all that. It means that throughout any episode in his run that's written by a different writer, the one thing that can remain consistent throughout pretty much all of them is those characters, because they carry the load a lot of the time. And then once you get an episode that actually is brilliant, has a great plot going for it, that's when you get the absolute peak of the show, because you have these characters that have been developed over many episodes with so many great traits, so much great dialogue, such a great backstory, and such a great dynamic between the Doctor and companion. And he's able to write a great plot to go with it, and it just creates this dynamite television that people remember for the rest of their life. That sticks with you. And he's also great at reinventing villains as well, the way he's able to do the Daleks, the Cybermen, and the Master differently to how they were done in Classic Who, do a completely different spin on all three of them in different ways. It's really interesting the way he does the Daleks with, God worshipping and with free-thinking lateral minds of the cult of Skaro. And then you've got the Cybermen who are adjusted to modern technology with a different take on why they're scary and what makes them what they are. And then with the Master being able to make him a far more vulnerable character that has so much fear about the hubris around being one of the last of the Time Lords with the Doctor, and how he is now so driven by all of the demons inside him and uses all of that wit and comedic pizzazz to sort of entertain himself whilst he suffers. And just the way he casts these actors to play all these roles too is just so fitting of his writing. His writing just fits like a glove to these actors, and it's so impressive, and I can't wait to see what he does next with the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He's so damn good at writing Doctor Who.
He's very, very bloody good.
Love him. So yeah. Tell us who your favourite writers are in the comments. Please do not put Chris Chibnall on your list. I beg of you. Please. He's so terrible.
It's not close, guys.
It's kind of crazy to me how there's genuinely people out there that think Chris Chibnall's better than Russell. Like that is.
Well, they can live in their fantasy.
Yeah, it just kind of blows my mind. I just personally can't understand how one person.
I can't see it. I can't. The level of quality is just so different. It's just so different.
Yeah.
Like, did you watch Legend of Sea Devils, guys? Did you watch Spyfall? Did you watch
The Timeless Children?
Fucking watch The Timeless Children?
Did you watch Ascension of the Cybermen? Did you watch Flux? Did you watch Revolution of the Daleks?
Did you watch 42? The signs were there from the start.
The best thing about 42's writing is Russell T.
Yeah.
Mm. It would have been... Imagine a Russell T Davies guest writer episode in the Chibnall era.
Oh god, the difference would be so fucking...
It would be weird.
It would be like Whiplash. It really would be.
It'd just be strange. I don't know what would happen.
No.
Anyway, but he really is suited to the showrunner role because he's able to construct these long-term character arcs that are so satisfying. And that's why Russell is so damn good at what he does.
Absolutely.
Yep. And it would not surprise me at all if that when he comes back, he'll give us heaps of bangers of stories, and it wouldn't surprise me if the 15th Doctor and Ruby Sunday end up being great characters, creating two new giant superstar actors once again, much like he did back in the day with Billy Piper and David Tennant. He's now going to do the same for the Chuta Gatwa and Billy Gibson. Oh, but he's just going to rehash Rose, isn't he? Because she's blonde, right? God, the amount of bad faith that Twitter gives to this man is so fucking weird. When he's literally written some of the most monumental TV in the history of the UK. Oh, it's just criminal how some people underestimate the abilities of this man. So yeah.
Yeah.
And with that, I say, see you next time on day 23 of the Advent Calendar, which will be tomorrow. Goodbye.
Wow.